Our moderator for today's AI panel is David Woodcock. David is a partner at Gibson Dunn in Dallas and Washington, D.C. He is a co-chair of the firm's Securities Enforcement practice. David also previously served as director of the SEC's Fort Worth Regional Office and as senior in-house counsel at ExxonMobil. Next to David is Michael Birnbaum. Michael is a partner at Morrison and Foerster in New York. He is co-head of the firm's New York litigation department and a partner in the firm's Securities litigation, Securities enforcement, and white-collar defense group. Before Morrison and Foerster, Michael served in the SEC for 11 years, most recently as senior trial counsel. Next to Michael is Ranah Esmaili, who is a partner at Sidley here in Washington, D.C. Ranah previously served as Assistant Director of the Asset Management Unit in the SEC's Division of Enforcement. She also served in multiple policy roles within the division, including a detail as counsel to the Directors of Enforcement and Senior Advisor to the AMU. On down the line, we have Brooke Hopkins, who is a Managing Director at Alvarez and Marsal in Dallas. She specializes in complex investigations and compliance. With more than 25 years of financial advisory and strategic consulting experience, Brooke has conducted governance diligence across environmental, health, and safety measures. And finally, we have Carolyn Welshhans all the way at the end, who is a partner at Morgan Lewis here in Washington, D.C. Carolyn is a 17-year veteran of the SEC, who most recently served as Associate Director of the SEC's Division of Enforcement. She also served as acting chief of the division's crypto assets and cyber unit, acting data officer for the division, and assistant director in the enforcement division's cyber and market abuse units. All right. With that, David, you have a fantastic panel. Take it away.
We do. We have the coolest panel today. People have been talking about it all day, so hopefully we'll be able to say some new things about it. So this is an exciting but challenging topic. We are all of us now living in this AI revolution that's happening. Several panels have mentioned some of the things in different spaces, but it touches everything. The rapidity of the growth in this area is sort of historic. There are many stats I could give. The easiest one is that the number of active users of ChatGPT in 2022 was effectively zero. There were some test cases, but it was effectively zero. Today, it is over 800 million. And it took other companies, Google and other companies, years to get that to that kind of user level. So it's just a tremendously fast growth. So there's so much going on. There's so much we could cover, but we can be sure that whatever we cover will be stale in 3 or 4 months. That's the other thing. So it's a cool development. Stepping back from the specifics, though, before we get into the questions with this great panel, one of the great promises of AI is the extraordinary efficiency gains that it's going to allow us, that it will allow us to make informed and intelligent decisions using fewer people. That's one of the great promises. That means fewer bankers, analysts, fewer white-collar workers, as we're seeing in the press, fewer regulators, fewer accountants, and fewer law firm attorneys are going to be needed, in theory. So every large bank, every brokerage firm, companies, their advisors, they're all looking at this. The Center for Audit Quality found that 90% of S&P 500 companies mentioned AI-related information in their 10Ks in 2024. And we've seen several large public companies recently announce sizable layoffs in the white-collar space that they attributed to AI gains, AI efficiency gains. So this rightly raises the fear that we're all going to be replaced. I would say that is only half the story, though. So you may have heard of this concept. It's become more in style now with AI. People in AI are talking about it, called Jevons paradox. And Jevons paradox describes how improvements in the efficiency of resource use paradoxically lead to an overall increase in resource consumption. And since I'm from Texas, I'll beat Michael to this comment, but since I'm from Texas, I'll give you an easy example. More fuel-efficient cars are designed to lower our use of fuel and energy. But more fuel-efficient cars actually result in people thinking, I can drive farther on my fuel. And they tend to drive more which actually increases fuel usage overall. And that's the paradox. And I apply that here. An example is from the 70s. I was an accountant in my younger days, so I was past this, but back in the 70s when they started inventing digital spreadsheets, everyone said, accountants are done. We're not going to need them anymore. Because people used to spend hundreds of hours in rooms together, tabulating things, and spreadsheets were going to change it all. Anyone who knows anything about finance or accounting knows that's not the case, right? They work just as hard and even harder on spreadsheets now. And I think that's the idea behind Jevons paradox, but also with respect to AI. So regulators are going to find more creative ways to use it. Companies are going to find more creative ways to use it. They're going to perhaps lose people in one area, but need people in other areas. And so it presents tremendous opportunities, is the point. I think so we don't want to think about this just as a negative. We want to think about it as the opportunities. I heard at a conference, I can't really attribute it to the person, but I thought it was brilliant. We won't be replaced by AI. We should have no fear of that. But we might be replaced by somebody who knows how to use AI. And so that's sort of the message here, and that's some of what we're going to discuss today. All right, so I'm going to begin very quickly to go through something that someone who's super technical in the audience is going to say I'm wrong about something, and I'm just going to admit it. I probably am. But a very high-level summary, because some of our great speakers are going to have comments on this. Let's talk a little bit about the language. The AI revolution kind of began years ago with straightforward automation and really key structuring data. You have to have the data structured so you can use it. Then came predictive AI. So you take that structured data and you create intelligence or analytics. You imagine a data scientist who studies the past to predict the next move, not creating new content and really not acting autonomously at all. Following predictive AI, you have generative AI. That's models that can generate new content. So think text and images, computer code, audio, even 3D models. And this is based on patterns learned from large data sets, large language models. Generative AI is awesome, but even better is agentic AI. And agentic AI refers to AI systems that take actions autonomously toward achieving goals that have been set. So you think about, they actually might use generative AI engines inside them, but imagine a colleague who not only drafts ideas, but also executes them and does it all by themselves, right, with autonomy. That's agentic AI. So with that background, thank you, panel, for your patience. Let's jump into a question, and I'm going to open this up to everyone. So with that background, how should we frame AI for practitioners who may see it as nothing more than a fad?
Start. I can certainly see and get why some may take that view. I think we can all think of hot new tech trends, right, that have come and gone in a heartbeat. I will note that in some ways it's not new, and there are, I think, a few lawyers in this room. So we think of, predictive coding for doc review, which has been around since at least I was a very, very young associate coming up. But obviously, the evolution and new uses are, it's evolving at breakneck speed. And with that, kind of the risks and frankly, the lack of understanding of where the risks may lie. And it's truly, become ubiquitous. And I think in terms of uses, it's not just the business that's using it, for example, for investment processes like, performance management or project management and trading, but also business and legal and compliance that are using it for things like monitoring and surveillance and contract ingestion and creation and review. I think what I would say to the fad comment is it really doesn't matter whether we think it's a fad, right? It is our business clients are using it, and they're using it because their business partners are demanding it. And so I think really the question for us becomes, how do we help guide our clients in terms of using it responsibly in a way that is compliant, which I think is a big part of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
Yeah, to Ranah's point, it doesn't really matter. Is AI a fad? Yes. On the one hand, it is. And I think that's where we've seen some of the SEC's AI washing cases. You could substitute, cannabis, crypto, when it got started, all of those things where it's just, companies kind of plugging and playing the latest topic And that's where, the SEC has brought those initial cases. But it's also not a fad. I also heard something on a conference panel, and I can't remember who said it, but it was great, that AI is computing. It is computing at this point. It has rapidly become it. And so, neither we nor clients, companies, regulated entities, nobody can ignore that. And instead, and I think that's what we're going to spend the panel talking about. So therefore, how do you prepare to use it responsibly and harness those opportunities, David, that you were talking about? And also, how do you prepare for the risks, whether it's your own use or somebody else using it that then impacts your company?
Yeah, it's a fad like the internet's a fad. I mean, some of us here learned how to shepherdize with a book. And I don't know of any client who wants to pay me right now to shepherdize with a book. But the version of Westlaw we're using now, or Lexis or any competitors, is better than the one I first trained on and called the 1-800 number 100 times. And that's true for AI too, certainly taking the job of somebody who's back in their shepardizing book days.
It's not aggressive from my point of view to call it not a fad. I think there's still growth to come. Super AI, which performs better than the human brain, is going to be here soon. I have this statistic that I find fascinating, similar to yours, David, but it took 16 years for cell phones to reach 100 million users. It took ChatGPT 2 months. It is a high-speed train.
Yeah.
So a fad, I agree with some things, but longer term, I think it's here to stay.
Well, we can maybe have a panel on this next year to see if we were right. So let's talk about regulators. So there's two pieces of this, how regulators are using AI. So let's start, Michael. What lessons can be drawn, if any, from past technological adoptions? And going way back, Office of the Internet Enforcement, but there are others, Crypto Task Force, Cybersecurity Task Force. What do you think?
So I think we could go two different ways. I mean, Carolyn, you mentioned cannabis and AI, two things I've never really thought about together, and I'll have to spend some time thinking about that. But sometimes you've seen the SEC take these ideas and fit them into old frameworks. We've seen the AI washing cases, greenwashing cases that are old laws, we're just calling them something fancy now. We've also seen, crypto being the most obvious, times when a new task force means a radical new departure. Maybe some old laws, other panels will debate that, but certainly a different direction. I think in this case, this commission is more likely to see where AI fits into the old laws rather than use the AI task force as an excuse to come to some new frontier.
Yeah.
But maybe as with crypto, it's going to be a little bit of a square peg round hole sometimes, because the laws didn't really think about deceiving people without even realizing you're deceiving people because the AI is outsmarting us.
Yeah, no, it's good. So, Carolyn, the SEC has announced an internal AI task force. What practical applications do you expect from that initiative?
I think the task force is really interesting. They haven't announced much beyond just their initial press release, but I think within that you can see a lot. Val Sapanek, who a lot of us know, talked in that press release about, I think, working across the agency. And anybody who knows Val, that's not a surprise that she's going to work across the agency. So I think we can expect a lot more collaboration across the divisions and offices. Things that enforcement might be doing, using large language models, for example, to look at corporate filings. That's going to be of interest to Corp Fin and their work, on the regulatory side. And then she also talked about wanting to really harness innovation and build on the work that's already ongoing. And that is also true. The SEC staff really love technology. They've been working with it for a long time. In enforcement, they've been using a lot of data analytics, obviously, on trading data. And I expect that what we're going to see is a building on what's already there using AI. But to your point, David, I don't think we should expect that to make some of the staff at the SEC obsolete. And I don't think we should want them to be either, because I think the idea being that AI can help generate some leads, but you want humans looking at it, and you want humans hearing from, counsel and their companies as to why that lead is not actually a case, because you've got to put together all the other evidence. So I think it's going to be an additive for those who are already embracing technology there.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how they are able to develop their internal tools, given the expense, right? The very, very expensive to build these LLMs. So it's a good point. So, Ranah, Chair Gensler repeatedly emphasized the promise and the risk of AI, and he noted dangers around conflicts of interest. Chair Atkins has talked much more about innovation. Do you think there has been a policy shift, and if so, should we expect more of a guidance first or enforcement first? What should we expect?
Guidance first, won't that be amazing? I think we all welcome that. I'm not optimistic that we're going to get written guidance imminently. It is entirely possible that in the medium term there will be something in the form of like deregulatory guidance, maybe in the form of no action relief, which we're seeing a lot of in the current administration. But I don't really expect to see anything that's kind of affirmatively, you cannot do the following things with AI along those lines. But in the meantime, I think, we can be listening for less formal forms of guidance that come out of the SEC, listening, to talking points at panels and, kind of reading the exam priorities to hear how the SEC is thinking about use of AI and the responsible use of AI. And so I'll just note a couple of things along those lines that have already been said and that are out there that I think will be informative for this group. So the SEC's Division of Exams, for example, has flagged AI as a risk area in the financial industry. They've said that exams will be conducting examinations, and I believe they have been, on whether firms have implemented adequate policies and procedures to monitor and supervise AI in areas such as trading functions, safekeeping of client records, fraud prevention and detection, back office operations, AML, and integration of regulatory tech. And then at SEC Speaks, several months ago on the exams panel, the SEC kind of spoke to use of AI and started to give, I think, a framework for registrants to be thinking about it, and spoke to three, I think, questions that compliance professionals, for example, should be asking, which I think are really the way that we are all starting to think about this and guide our clients. And the first is governance, right? Is there a governance framework for determining whether AI functions as intended? Who has access to AI, like the who, and who's using it? Is there a human in the loop, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit more later, and does that human understand what the AI is doing? Monitoring, and is there a compliance framework to address AI from a monitoring perspective? And the third was risks, and the risks that the SEC at SEC Speaks flagged were privacy, bias, and hallucination. And I'll just add to that, they didn't say this, but in my own words, other risks to be thinking about, I think, are litigation risk around accuracy issues. And then, of course, many of our clients are adopting AI tools in connection with video calls. They're recording them, transcribing, summarizing. And I think there are obviously state law, potential state law issues around consent. So risks abound in different pockets of the law, not just SEC kind of regulatory.
So a lot of policies and procedures and governance.
Yeah, a lot to think about and to get one's head around.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. So Brooke, this is a fun one. Should registrants expect AI-driven enforcement actions to look different, better, stronger, faster, data-driven, or not?
Better. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think where we're going to see it go is large language models will be augmented for specific use cases. That will save a lot of money to the SEC because it's millions of dollars to build an LLM versus augmentation is tens of thousands of dollars. Huge difference there. I also think that even within a compliance perspective, that the SEC will benefit by creating its own code to support that large language model. And I think the chief AI officer spoke about that. To the extent code is developed, it will be shared, reused, but that basis, that building soup to nuts is not something I would expect. I think commercially available, getting licensed to that, and augmentation is what we'll see.
Okay, I'm going to call an audible here and jump to another question we were going to ask, and luckily it comes to you. So, question, SEC takes an existing LLM and augments it with more specific data and then adapts it to their own use. But at some level, they're still using an existing LLM that someone else created, right? And this question kind of relates to that, but also, what happens if most firms are relying on a handful of foundational models, right? It's almost like there will be a consensus because we're all getting our answers from the same place. Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think, it's that herd effect, so to speak, where if they all start tapping into the same LLM, then they're going to get the same results. And if that is flawed in any way, which I think you could guarantee 90% of the time, you're going to get an error. And if you don't ask back, are you sure about that? Then you might take that information for what it is. The output, especially from a market perspective, could be detrimental. I mean, volatility could go through the roof, liquidity could have major issues. So if we have that, and I think Chair Gensler talked about this, that it would create this monoculture that really would have fallout, that inherently lies systemic risk, which we don't want.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Okay, Carolyn, one more question on this, from the regulator perspective. In Texas, some places we have these cameras that track you if you run a stoplight, and there was a blow up when they first put them in. That's a violation of my rights. You should not be able to record me and give me a ticket, which I thought it was kind of funny. My wife actually got a ticket from that. I'd never let her live it down because it's on camera and everything was great. But they got rid of them. So from the SEC perspective, how should we think about the trade-off between this regulatory efficiency using these tools and registrants' due process rights when AI might be used to identify red flags? Is there any relationship between those two?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I was saying before, I think it's building on what the SEC has already done in terms of when we're talking about the SEC's own use of AI and surveillance and enforcement cases and things of that nature. So, again, I don't see the SEC walking into court and saying, AI said that, your client violated the law, here we go. I think that it's going to be used to help generate leads or augment on existing cases, particularly insider trading, market manipulation, things of that nature. But they're still going to have to go out and get the brokerage records. They're still going to have to prove intent. They're still going to have to prove violation of a duty. They're still going to want to look at emails to the extent it's a case they're able to get them. And so, the evidence is going to come from a lot of places, which is still going to give a lot of opportunities to push back on, the elements of the law aren't being met. And you may have started with, what looks like suspicious trading, but that doesn't get you all of the way there.
Let's move on, thank you. Let's move on to navigating AI in practice. And Michael, I'm going to start with you. Do you think from a registrant or a company's under investigation, do you think reliance on AI could ever serve as a mitigating factor in an enforcement investigation? Showing firms reasonable efforts or attempts to do the right thing, or is it really going to just create risks?
Well, absolutely, the former. I think it gets back to one of the themes here. It's not AI instead. There has to be a human element to it, and we've seen cases coming out of the SEC and FINRA and already, where you can't just say I have AI flagging SARs now, but I have nobody looking at the SAR or nobody making any judgment call on whether to report the SAR. We've heard examples of AML or know your client. At some point, you're going to be able to say to the SEC, and we have the right processes here. Look how much better we're leveraging our resources, but we're not perfect. And if I've heard a theme through today's panels, there seems to be a little bit of a confidence that the imperfect policy is not going to be the target anymore, or the imperfect execution won't be the target anymore. And so yes, I think it'll be a very mitigating factor. But I also think we have to talk to our clients in the way we talk to a lot of our associates or colleagues, It's not whether you're using AI. If you're not using AI at all right now, that's its own problem. Are you using it intelligently? Do you know what it's doing? When you advertise to the market that you're picking stocks using AI, do you know what you even mean by that? And so if it's just I have a lot of great policies, no, it won't mitigate at all. But if I'm leveraging those policies, I think it will help explain why, yeah, I might have missed something, but I missed something instead of 5 things because of what I'm using.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like it. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add that, if at a firm you believe your policy is we don't permit AI, and you believe that your people are in compliance with it, I think you are setting yourself up, right? This is a little bit of like an ostrich's head in the sand situation. And so I do think really the key is to be embracing and then creating like the regulatory framework around it. But this idea that you're just gonna reject it because you don't understand it, I think the ship has sailed on that. And so firms really need to be stepping forward.
And just to add to that, if you don't allow it, it could be riskier, which means your employees could be going to ChatGPT as opposed to some proprietary security-driven tool. And one other thing Michael said, I think it's so important that once you start looking at policies and procedures, the training for that has to involve how do you use AI? What are the prompts? Because if you just ask it this simple question, again, we go back to hallucinations, errors, then you're going to end up with the incorrect answer. If you ask for a source and you get the link, but you don't click on that link, you might not have the right source. So I think it's part of that training. You have to focus really on how do you do this? What does execution look like?
It's a nice segue to Carolyn. From a firm's perspective, what does responsible AI adoption look like in compliance?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about a firm's policies and procedures, I think a really important thing to really keep in mind is that the SEC standards is reasonableness. When we're talking particularly about regulated entities such as investment advisors and broker-dealers. And I always think that reasonableness starts with really thinking about your business model, and what you want to do, because everything flows from that. It becomes reasonable if you first thought about your use and your risks. So I think the first place is, how are you planning on using AI? Why do you want to use it? I think that's a really important and serious question to ask and have a discussion around. What is your business use? You shouldn't just be rushing out to use it because it's the fad and everybody's using it. You should really be thinking about your business model and how it applies. So the first is the what, and then the second comes back to the who, which I think Brooke mentioned before. Who is going to be using it? Because then from there flows, well, what needs to be the compliance program? What needs to be the training? And not just who is using it, but who is responsible for that compliance program, for that training, for making sure those policies and procedures are updated. And then the last thing, I think the last pillar to any really strong compliance program and responsible use of AI, like a lot of things, is the documentation. Are you documenting the training? Are you documenting whatever might be required by your policies and procedures? Because again, I think that all goes back to reasonableness, and it all goes back to somewhat of the reliance issue that Michael was talking about. Being able to say to regulators if something happened, look, the standard's not perfection, it's reasonableness. Here's all the things we thought about, all the things that we put into our program, and all the things that we did. And I think that is the place you want to be. If you're having questions asked, whether it's by exams or worst case scenario by enforcement.
That's great stuff. So the question that I think that we probably all would like to know the answer to, Brooke, I'm going to come to you on this. How should companies address the risk of hallucinations? So these models are probabilistic, so they are based on probabilities. You can't get the error rate to 0, right? They're not really answering your question. They're trying to give you the answer they think it should give you. So how do you deal with hallucinations or bias or errors? And is a human in the loop really enough?
So no, not enough. But I do want to talk about that more. But you have to look at AI and integrate it within your entire risk environment. It is going to be one of the largest risks if you're using it because of how faulty it can be. Now, if it's proprietary and you have resources actively managing that, you still have risk. It still needs to go into the risk assessment, risk environment, but at least that's more managed. Now, yes, human in the loop is a must. As inefficient as we are, you must have human in the loop because there are questions. You have to have an interpretation of meaning at times. You're not going to get that with AI. You also are not going to get what's customary, what's the norms here. So there's behavioral elements you have to consider too. I think third, there's frameworks out there to look at. I think they're great guidance. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, which most companies, unless you're a federal contractor, don't have to follow, but they have an entire AI risk management framework. Don't try to build it ground up yourself. Look at that, look at your business case, your goals, and attribute how you can use that. And then lastly, I'll also say, in addition to hallucinations, AI can be extremely biased. And some of the state regulations you see deal with employment, hiring bias, things that easily can happen with AI. So look at integrating fairness audits, monitoring, as well as looking at how can you make sure that you have confidence in the data? So confidence scoring, which is really helpful because that gives you low, medium, high. I don't know why you want to rely on a low confidence score answer.
Cost.
Possible.
That's why.
And for transparency, if the SEC comes knocking, it's great to be able to have that.
Yeah, that's true, but it costs, right? To get the higher level of confidence, it costs more.
Absolutely.
And so if you pick a low cost, that's probably not a great answer for the SEC or anybody else if you've messed up. Yeah, if you've messed up. Ranah, just say a bit about a more specific question about SIFMA's recent request for the SEC to update the record retention rules for BDs, IAs. How does AI come into play there?
Yeah, the AI was a piece of a broader request for a modernization of the books and records rules. So SIFMA several weeks ago put a letter into the SEC asking to modernize the books and records rule in many ways, and much of that was a response to. I thought we were going to get away with not saying off-channel communications today, but I'm just going to say it. But in response to obviously those cases from the last administration, but a piece of that letter addressed some of the really prevalent questions that are out there and that we're getting from our clients about kind of AI and books and records. And those questions have to do with how recorded calls, transcripts of calls, summaries of calls, how those interplay with the books and records rules, prompts, right, are prompts required to be record kept. And so one part of a bigger set of requests to the SEC was to clarify that the answer to those questions is no, which I think is what most of us believe, that those are not required books and records. But just a reminder that even if they're not required books and records, if you have them, if you're retaining them and you get an inquiry, you get an examination, they are your records, they are in your records, and so they are kind of subject to production and discovery. But that's really what the SIFMA rule was touching on. We'll see what happens with that. We're all keeping our fingers crossed for some modernization there.
But it's the kind of thing that shows this is going to be everywhere, right? I mean, these old rules are going to be applying to new things. Michael, how should companies think about AI in the context of their disclosures?
Sure, that's tricky, in part because you want to know how other people are thinking about AI in the disclosures. One of the great things about getting people together here is I can ask any one of you, how are you handling something? But AI, I can kind of ask AI how all of you are handling something. And that can be great, but it can also be dangerous. It can be great because if I have a client that makes widget X, I want to see how all the other widget X companies are disclosing a certain risk, because it might inform, not relying on AI by itself, but it might inform how I want to talk about it. The problem is there's a bit of a feedback loop, a little bit like you were talking about with some of the LLMs, where if all of a sudden all of you are consulting with each other faster through AI, and everybody's kind of sanding down the edges on the same disclosures, well then if I don't follow all of you, I stand out, and the SEC comes knocking and says, well, why does your disclosure look weird?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really two things. One, how do we use it? Well, it helps. It's a lot more efficient than sending a first-year associate to go look at 1,000 10Ks. It helps me know what everybody else is saying. But there also has to be a little extra care in there in saying, once I see if my disclosures do look different, let's talk with the client about whether they should look different.
Yeah. That's a great point, and the SEC has all of this structured data. I mean, there can't be a better test case for really using it for precisely what you're describing, both for registrants, but also the SEC itself. We have just 8 minutes left. Carolyn, what kinds, I think we've kind of touched on this around the edges, but what kind of AI-related enforcement cases are we likely to see in the next 3 years? Put your prediction hat on.
I'll use predictive AI on this.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we'll continue to see some AI washing cases and things of that flavor, of companies saying they're using AI in a way that they're not. But to Ranah's point earlier, I think a lot of this is probably going to come out of exams. In terms of, I think first we're going to see risk alerts and exams really talking about what they're seeing in terms of AI use and policies and procedures. And then, I mean, I just think that, there are already firms out there who are using AI when it comes to proprietary trading. There's going to be enormous pressure for more people, more companies to do that. We saw an explosion after the release of DeepSeek from China in terms of Chinese retail traders wanting to get trained up on using AI to place their own trades. And so I think that companies here in the US, registered entities, would be really well served to think not just about their AI-specific policies and procedures, but how AI might implicate other things like net capital, like the market access rule, like 204 Cap A and 15G when it comes to misuse of material non-public information. Going back to Ranah's point of, I think that the SEC is gonna look at what's already there as opposed to trying to create something out of whole cloth when it comes to trying to get their arms around and making sure that AI is being used responsibly.
Yeah. Brooke, so this is a favorite topic of mine, but I'm not going to talk about it. You are. How are the EU and UK rules, like particularly the EU AI Act, how might that influence US policy, SEC, or how companies behave in generally? What is it and how might it impact things here?
So the EU AI Act is by far the most comprehensive regulation around AI. It takes a risk-based approach, and it really applies to individuals and companies that are using AI for commercial purposes in the EU. So it's not an individual who's going to London for vacation and using ChatGPT to find where to go to dinner. So it's commercial purposes. But what it does is it looks at the different ways that you're using AI for commercial purposes. So if you're deploying AI or if you're developing AI, and it ranks it by risk. So is it high risk? Is it limited? Is it minimal? And it's just those three. So as they look at everything, they say, this is high. Give us the reason for being in the EU. What are you doing to mitigate the risk? And I think that reflects what the SEC is already looking at, a very risk-based approach to looking at disclosures. I think it's probably what they've always done. So it's already kind of feeding that, but more broadly, I think it could serve as a benchmark, similar to GDPR. Where, that was also extremely comprehensive, still is, and privacy laws started coming out, both from a state and agency perspective. And that's really, I think it's going to take a while before we start to see agency-specific regulations, maybe. But I think that's what will differ, is this will really focus on specific use cases. So what are the SEC rules around AI for those use cases? And now, currently, it still has to support an innovation first while balancing with regulation. So that's different because EU AI Act protects individual rights, which is not what regulation here would do.
Yeah, I think the EU regulatory system is very different from the US, especially today.
Yep.
And I have a hard time imagining there being something similar in the US to what the EU, but there are a lot of multinational companies that are going to have to deal with that. And I just wonder how much that's going to, whether you can carve out your operations in Europe to deal with that act and then come over here.
You absolutely should take, as part of the risk assessment that you do, and looking at your risk environment, that should be part of the exposure, not just for your company or your client's company, but what are your third parties doing too? So if your third parties are in Europe using your products that have AI, you have exposure to that act. So yeah, absolutely, David. When you do that risk assessment and you have anything in Europe and you have an AI component, you need to factor that in.
Sorry, one more question on this. Do you think that act is likely to spur greater innovation with AI or not? Or will it have any impact?
Maybe.
Yeah.
That's my attorney.
Wait, maybe what? Maybe
answer.
it will, maybe it won't. Yes, okay. All right. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left. So this is the lightning round. I'm going to ask 2 questions to each of you. You don't have to answer both of them. One question is, any quick tip you can give the group about how you're using AI or you're seeing your clients use AI that you thought were pretty interesting, and then any parting words.
And what was the second question?
Parting words.
Parting words, but any cool tip.
I mean, we're starting to use it with client consent on document reviews, and just finding it to be just a real advancement in terms of really getting to hot key documents very efficiently. So, I think that that's really exciting where that's going. And in terms of parting words, you'd said at the beginning, David, that everything we said could be outdated in 3 months. I completely agree. If there's a market dislocation that in any way traces back to AI or is in any way AI is contributing to it, I think everything we said today, all bets are off in terms of what happens with the regulators.
I'm sorry, I have to say something about your comment about being outdated. I of course use ChatGPT to do some of this, and one of the things I said is, what does ChatGPT predict that AI is going to be able to do in 10 years? That was my question to it, and it gave me a bunch of stuff. And one of the things it gave me, I had just been at a conference where someone was talking about what they were doing, and they were doing that thing. And ChatGPT said in 10 years they might be doing this, and I was like, they're already doing that. So anyway, sorry. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I think if you haven't started, I'm curious, how many people have used AI? Raise your hand. Okay, so if you haven't, or if you've just used it once, get on AI, test it out, ask it questions, and then ask it if it's sure about that answer. You're going to see how many times it says, well, maybe not, maybe this is a better answer. So get comfortable with it, then look at it from the perspective of compliance with your clients. How should this be addressed from a risk perspective, from a training perspective, when you think about prompts and incorporating that in? And then really, how do you execute on it and monitor it? It's not unlike other compliance, high-risk, high-stake compliance areas.
So Bruce will probably kill me because we are now out of time. So do you want to say something in 5 seconds? Michael?
I think you hit it on the head, which is not thinking of AI as something out there. It's something you're interacting with. You are part of the solution or the problem, and as soon as you figure that out, That's what the SEC will be looking at, and that's what we have to be looking at.
And I'll finish by saying be part of the solution, not the problem.
Great. Thank you so much, panel. You were great. Thank you. Nice job.